Are we moving on to lethal weapons?
Yep.
All right. What do we have?
So I don't recommend lethal weapons for a variety of reasons, but if you're going to go there, you almost certainly have to get a concealed carry permit.
Hmm.
You've got to be 21 in order to do that. I think that's federal law. It takes lots of practice. So my father bought me my first handgun when I turned 21.
Hmm.
And we went to a little sandbank where we could shoot safely. And
Hmm.
um, it was shocking how hard it was to hit the target, even from relatively close. I practiced with it off and on. By the time I got into police work, um, I was 29. I'd practiced a fair amount. Um, when I went through the academy, we had a solid week on the firing range, and my final score was about 85%. I learned that the average cop hits their target about 80% of the time.
There you go.
And I thought, that's not good enough. Um, because 20% of the time, my bullet is going to hit something else, and that something else could be a person.
Yeah.
And I don't ever want to shoot. If I need to use my weapon, I don't want it to ever injure an innocent person.
Yeah.
And so I practiced and practiced. I bought a reloading setup. I reloaded my own bullets. I fired hundreds of rounds a month. I got to where um, I never dropped a bullet outside of about a 3.5 4 inch circle.
Hmm.
Um,
Wow.
and so I made expert, which is the highest rank you can have on a tactical pistol course.
Yeah.
Um, and I was comfortable with that, right? I mean, there is a place where good enough, a 3 or 4 inch circle.
Yeah.
And some of those shots were back from 50 yards. So
Wow.
is that right? No, I think it was 50 feet. I'm sorry. But
Okay.
still, it was a distance.
Yeah.
Um, eh, um, but it takes work to get there. Guns are
Yeah.
not easy to use.
Yeah. Yeah. And
So
there's lots of practice that's required, and lots of we're a week out now. As when people are hearing this, it'll be a little bit later than when we're shooting or filming this. But last week, the set of that movie
yeah,
Rush, Alec Baldwin was handed a weapon, was told it was cold, and shot someone dead and injured someone else. So they're not to be trifled with.
yeah, not no, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'll tell you, when I first got my concealed weapons permit, I didn't get one until actually I got one early on, but I didn't ever carry a gun with me until I was in law enforcement. And part of that is you become a target
Mm.
as a police officer.
As a
You
police,
become a target,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so I had people threaten to kill me
yeah,
while I was a cop, and so
yeah,
you've got to carry the gun, but it gets old really fast. It's heavy.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
like just stupid to have to
yeah.
carry it around. So
I see
um,
civilians carrying it around, and it's just like that looks cumbersome.
yeah, it is. It's they're bulky, they're
Yeah,
heavy.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. All right, let's come back to our slides. We're talking about kind of the pros and cons of guns here.
Okay, so both the guns and the ammunition are expensive. There are
Yeah,
fees for target ranges. It's hard to find a place to shoot, at least where I live, unless you go to a target range.
yeah,
If you make a mistake, just like the Baldwin thing, the results can be catastrophic.
yeah, yeah.
Um, the big thing that I object to for trans people getting a gun is that trans people have about a 40% rate of attempted suicide at least once in their life.
Oh dear, yeah.
And and for perspective, the average nationally is about 1.5%.
Okay, yeah,
The reason is not that trans people are mentally ill or more prone to depression. The reason is the culture we live in is so degrading to trans people that um, it's easy to feel like you aren't worth anything.
yeah,
And if you're trans and you have a gun, the risk of actually using it for suicide is so high compared to your risk of being killed in some other way
yeah,
that I, I, I couldn't ethically recommend
yeah,
a gun to anyone that was at high risk for suicide.
Yeah. And you covered that. I think it'll be part one of this interview where we talk about the kind of state of being trans and what that kind of
Yeah.
statistics there. And I loved what you said. And I was talking to a friend of mine because we've done this in two parts. And I was like, it's not so much that trans folks need to learn to kick and punch. Kind of the rest of us need to learn how to like not be assholes to trans people is kind of what I'm like I want everyone to have these tools and skills and abilities, but if the rest of us could not be so mean and brutal, then maybe half their job is done or more.
I think
So
more.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah,
do.
definitely, yeah.
Yeah, and I do have some. So there's a spark of compassion. I've taught in the K-12 system. I see
Mm-hmm.
at third grade, roughly, kids start gender policing each other. I
Mm-hmm.
think that the people that are most likely to be transphobic and to assault are people that have given up parts of their own femininity when they were young.
Oh,
And so what they're doing is they're externalizing their feelings. That it's like, I gave it up, so should
so
you.
should you.
And my existence reminds them that they hurt because they had to cut out a part of themselves.
Yeah,
Um, so I have some compassion for that. I don't have compassion for the brutality, but I have compassion for the suffering
yeah.
that people who are transphobic experience.
You're a
Um,
kind-hearted person, Erika.
you know.
I'm a bit more judgmental, but I'm working on it.
Okay, until then, asshole works. We can use that as a working term
Yes. It's I'm a work in progress
for all of us.
for all of us. And I'm
Um,
learning from you. You're teaching me a lot.
so, and then the thing is, sometimes it's the only reasonable tool for the situation.
Yes.
Um, when I was in law enforcement, I had people threaten my life, as I've said.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes they didn't just threaten my life. I mean, that happened so often, I would just be blasé about it. But
Yeah.
I had people tell me where I lived and tell me they'd seen me out walking my dog and threatened to shoot me. And
Wow. There's a tweet or something I saw about the Baldwin situation, and someone they were kind of making some stance about guns, and they were like, there's never like an appropriate time for guns, and I was like, really? What if someone's coming at you with a gun? Like,
yeah.
can we can we use our imagination? We don't have to use it too hard. So, what's that balance though? Like, if there's that time, like you're saying, there's that situation where we just might need it versus all the work and expense and time. Like, I may or may not ever have that experience. Well, I guess, are we talking about risk factors? Like, how do you make that calculation of should I invest in that?
So I have a 9mm.
Yeah.
It's a KAR, KAHR.
Hmm.
It's got tritium night sights, so I can see my sights at night.
Yeah.
It's the I have never held a small gun. I have very large hands. I've never held a small gun that fit my hand any better. There's the geometry of a lot of small guns. My hand has to get really contorted in order to use it.
Mm.
This gun, I pick it up and my hand knows exactly, and I know that I can place a bullet where I want it to go.
Hmm.
Um, and there are times where I do carry it, but it's rare. It's like almost never.
Yeah.
Um, but we live in difficult times.
Yeah.
Um, we have groups of what right-wing extremists come to our state capitol. Some of those groups have histories of targeting gender nonconforming people and killing them. And I more view the gun as a talisman. I believe that if I have the gun with me, I will exude a level of confidence that will
Mm.
say, "Oh hell no,"
Yeah.
right? And so, yeah, I've never had to use it.
That's an
But
interesting point. I've heard criticisms of weapons of all sorts, including guns, that they're a talisman or a good luck charm. Um, but and I've heard that in a negative way, but I'm hearing this in a positive way from you, and how it can affect your confidence and how you carry yourself. I think
yeah,
that's a really important distinction.
so I may have said this before. Um, it's not that I've never been in a shoot, don't shoot situation. I have, and I've actually been criticized for not shooting somebody.
Mm-hmm.
But in every one of those situations, and I never fired my gun at a person, but in every one of those situations where shooting was justified, um, I had I had the person lined up in my sights. I had 12 and a half, 13 pounds of trigger pull on a 13 and a half pound trigger. So just the tiniest little pressure and it would have snapped and
Right.
fired.
Right.
Um, and in every situation there was a mental line that I thought that I didn't speak. And it was either you cross that line like a laser pointer line in the sand. You
Mm,
cross that line and you die, or you do this and you die, or you twitch and you die, and nobody ever did. The
mm,
people felt that um, there was no there was we were at that point where there was no negotiating, there was no wiggle
right.
room. There was like you and so they would stop, and I would
Yeah.
say, I would look them right in the eye and I would say, you need to trust me. I will not hurt you, but
Mm-hmm.
you need to turn around and put your hands behind your back. And they would do that, and I would holster my weapon and I would get my cuffs and I would cuff them, and but nobody ever got hurt.
Yeah.
And so the being good with it, being so good that I could surgically remove your left ventricle, which is what I would target because I was told that that was the quickest way to immobilize a person.
We need to go to the range. I have a lot to learn from you.
Um, but I could do that in those days. I
Yeah.
could probably
Yeah.
still do it because I've got the muscle memory from tens of thousands of rounds that I've fired.
Well, you're raising some really interesting points, and if you haven't seen the part of the interview, that this is part two, where Erika talks about the emotional projection and intuition and that kind of stuff and how you carry yourself. It's so good. And again, here's some practical application of what we talked about, because it sounds like when you had that gun, you're in that position. One, you had the training, you knew you could back up what you needed to by the training and the skill level, but also like you knew what the boundary was, right? Like if what if you cross that line or you do this thing, then that's the end of the story. And so like it sounds like you already knew. I don't, maybe that's based on policy that you followed or your own kind of instinct, but it was that line. And something you said in another interview, it was that decision, like if you have to kill someone, you have to be prepared to make that decision. If and if people don't want to do that, I'm not here to advocate something you don't want to believe in, but that's what it takes, is what I'm hearing you say.
Yeah, you should never ever have a gun if
Yeah,
you're not fully capable of using it.
yeah,
Women are more often killed with their own guns than they are with other people's guns.
yeah. I
So
I know of stories where, oh, I pulled a gun on him and they weren't prepared to use it, and it didn't turn out well
yeah,
for the person who
yeah,
pulled the gun. Yeah,
yeah,
you don't point a gun at somebody unless you're going to use it, because they will, yeah,
yeah.
just piss them off royally. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah,
And so pepper spray, right? I mean, you just spray them, right?
yeah,
It's simple, right?
yeah,
And there's no huge moral consequence. There's no huge legal consequence like there would be if you shot somebody.
yeah, yeah. Okay. I think we have one more slide here, Erika. I could just like ask you questions all day, but I'm
Okay.
trying to stick to the agenda here. So the choice of weapon. Okay, here we go.
Okay. So if you're going to use a firearm, again, I don't recommend it.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to consider first the quality of manufacture. I would only carry a gun that I had complete confidence in. So Smith and Wesson, Ruger, Colt, Carr is a newer brand, but they've got a very good reputation. Um, you want to consider the size. As a duty weapon, I carried a Sig Sauer
Mm-hmm.
in 45 caliber,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a large weapon,
Mm-hmm.
and Sig Sauer is another excellent gun. It was the only 45 that could win a match out of the box without being fine-tuned.
Wow.
And several did. And so I knew that that would be a good gun for me as an officer.
Yeah.
Caliber, 22 is more effective than a 25. 25 can bounce off a person's skull.
Oh,
22s don't. They tend to have about the same energy, but it's a little smaller and it will punch a hole through a person's skull.
okay.
22s are not at all lethal any other part of the body except a headshot. And
Okay.
it's got to be a skull shot, not a face, like a lower face shot. So,
Okay.
but uh, for something into their cranium, 22 is one of the most lethal guns there is because it ricochets inside the skull. It won't penetrate out again.
Okay.
9mm really common. I wouldn't carry anything less powerful than that. I carry a relatively um, high energy round with large hollow points.
Hmm.
Um, 9mm have a tendency to overpenetrate the body, which means um, they're like 350 foot-pounds of energy, 300, 350.
Hmm.
If you shoot and it goes through the body, all the energy that carries the bullet out of the body is waste, right?
Okay.
Where 45, they almost never overpenetrate. So if it's got about 350, 375 foot-pounds,
Yeah.
all of that energy gets transmitted into the body.
Okay.
Um, and I like the idea of no overpenetration. I'm not going to shoot somebody like Baldwin did. That other person was behind the first person,
Got shot too.
right?
Yeah.
No overpenetration. The bullet's going to stay. The compromise for me is a 45 is a little bit bigger weapon. The bullets are a little heavier. I chose a 9, but I chose this round that probably won't overpenetrate because it's got a very reliable hollow point,
Hmm.
and hollow points aren't overly reliable. So when I say very reliable, I'm saying for being a hollow point, it's
Okay.
pretty reliable.
Got it. Okay.
It also feeds in my gun perfectly. Um, so the bigger the hollow point, some guns won't feed them. Um, so there's a lot to consider. Carry options. Do you carry it in your waistband? Do you carry it in your pocket? Do you wear a shoulder holster? They make thigh holsters for women to carry a gun under your dress or skirt. Um, Knives are generally considered lethal weapons. And the state of Washington, where I live, I have a concealed weapons permit for my gun, but it doesn't cover knives.
Oh, good point. Good distinction. Yeah.
Even though it's a lethal weapon, it does not cover a knife. And if I used a knife for self-defense and it was found to be not justified, I would also lose my concealed weapons permit. Um,
Oh, good to know. Yeah.
so I do have a knife that I sometimes carry. I can open it with one hand.
Yeah.
Um, I know if I go to use it, it will be a lethal strike.
Yeah.
Um, but I will only use it if I'm justified in killing the person.
Well, and you're making me think of something, Erica, which is there's distinctions between like what you leave your house with and consciously choose to carry with you versus you're in your home and maybe something happens there, right? Like it's like there'd be different consequences if I leave my house with a butcher knife go shopping versus if I'm home and something were to happen and I pull that. Is that a fair
It is,
distinction?
except,
Please.
so um, I don't remember if I covered the Castle Doctrine in self-defense. The, just briefly, the Castle Doctrine is an extension of the doctrine of self-defense. And the mistake that most people make when they think about Castle Doctrine, and I see this done in the movies,
Yeah.
people say things that indicate that they've learned uh, the lesson improperly. Um, you hear people say, if you shoot him on the doorstep, drag the body in.
I
No,
literally have family.
yeah,
It's my Texas family. That's the yeah, that's what their advice
yeah.
is.
So that doesn't work. The
Yeah.
Castle Doctrine, so in self-defense, if you're using a lethal weapon, the other person has to present a lethal threat. Otherwise, it's illegal.
Right. Okay, good point. Yep.
Castle Doctrine says that you don't there are certain assumptions you can make if something happens inside your house, but the certain things have to happen inside your house. So if you're in your house and you have a gun and you're pointing it at a person and you say, stop or I'll shoot,
Yeah.
and they walk towards you,
Yeah.
castle doctrine allows you to assume that they will kill you if they get to you.
Okay.
Um, if you had a baby and you heard something and you open the door and there's a stranger there with your baby, you're allowed to shoot them because the castle doctrine says that the assumption you're allowed to make is they can kidnap your baby and maybe your baby will die.
Okay.
So basically there has to be a lethal threat in a castle doctrine
Got
situation.
it. Okay.
So it just expands what a lethal threat looks like, but it
Yeah.
still has to be a lethal threat. You don't get a free shot at somebody just because they're inside your house.
Yeah. Okay. That's a really important distinction. Again, if you haven't seen the legal conversation Erica and I had, go check that out. So that was the last slide, Erica, with regards to weapons. Anything to wrap that section up before we wrap this conversation?
Um, since castle doctrine, just one last thing,
Yeah.
reasonable mistakes do apply there too. So
Okay.
there are a number of cases where somebody used a large screwdriver or something like that to jimmy a door and get inside a house, and then they're walking around with this screwdriver in their hand, and the
Yeah.
homeowner shot them.
Yeah.
And and the it actually, some of those have gone all the way up to the US Supreme Court, and the law is that if it looked like it was a knife, right, and at night this thing that a screwdriver and a knife, they're hard to tell apart.
Yeah. Yeah.
If it looked like it was a knife, then it was a good shoot because you made a reasonable mistake about what it was.
Got it. Okay. Okay. Whew.
Here's one other thing about shooting. Something that really stuck with me. In the police academy, we had a series of shoot, don't shoot videos.
Hmm.
And so they're acted out, and then the frame is stopped and you have to make a decision, do you shoot or not shoot that person?
Right.
And I shot the wrong person in one. I only made a mistake once, but that was
Yeah.
enough to haunt me for the rest of my career.
Yeah.
And it was a domestic violence, guns were involved. Somebody comes running out of the house towards you, they're distraught, you order them to stop, they don't stop, they keep running towards you. You keep shouting at them to stop, they reach into their back pocket, they start to pull something out, and then the screen went blank and it was shoot, don't shoot. I
Yeah.
shot. It was a deaf person who was going to pull out a card to say I'm deaf
Oh dear.
in their
Yeah.
wallet.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh boy.
And so anyone who's even thinking about carrying a gun, you should go through some of that training.
Yeah, yeah. Training is key. And I know we talked about physical, we talked about weapons. And, you know, this I think is a great introduction. I would encourage folks to get with a teacher that you can work with in person. These are not things you can actually learn online very well. I think this has been a great introductory conversation, hopefully to get people started. Erika, as we wrap up, what are your thoughts? Again, we're targeting this conversation for folks who are trans and their personal safety. What kind of parting thoughts do you have for those folks as they move forward and have to navigate the world?
Well, a couple of things. First off, as I said in the first set of videos, if you can avoid the danger, that is always the best.
Yeah.
It's better than any other thing we've talked about, right? Always avoid the danger if possible. And then secondly, I strongly advocate people getting some kind of martial arts training because it changes how you walk, it changes your posture. And if you move through the world like I am not an easy target, and people won't bother you.
Yeah. Very cool. Erika, thank you so much for this conversation. I have learned so much as a cisgendered person, and I'm excited to share this with the world. And thank you for schooling and educating me and giving me a new lens. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for this work you do.
Oh, you're welcome.